So let's get right to it. Let's start with the position of the arm on the guitar's body. Pay particular attention to the angle of the wrist. The angle of my wrist right now is what you don't want. It's too straight. What you want is to have a gentle curve, okay? This gentle curve here. And then as you're strumming, you want to be using that curve to your advantage. Notice how you can now see the back of my wrist, and now you can kind of see the front of my wrist, all right? And you want to do that across the strings. So let's use that down, down, up, down, up strumming pattern to see what that looks like. Notice also that the angle of my arm is it's at an angle across the guitar, almost like 45 degrees, right? The arm isn't down here, and it's certainly not up here. It's going at a nice angle. One thing you certainly don't want to do when you're strumming is strum from the elbow, and that's going to look something like this. You can see your whole arm moving, and you haven't got any wrist motion whatsoever. So now we know what strumming looks like. What should it feel like? You're really searching for a gliding motion across the strings here. You want less attack and more of the note. What does that mean? Well, the attack is the first part of when you hit the string. It's this sound, and you're always going to get that. But you want less of that harsh sound and more of the note. So let me give you an example. If I attack the string too viciously, it's going to sound like this. Can you hear how there's more of that going on? But if I do it a little more gently, a little more softly, suddenly we have less attack and more of the note is actually able to ring out. One useful analogy I find is to think of all 6 of these strings as one big chunky string. So you don't want to be getting the strings one after the other like this as you're strumming. You can clearly hear there are separate noises there. What you want is to think of it as one big chunky string on your downstroke and one big chunky string on your upstroke. And by the way, your downstrokes and your upstrokes are going to be slightly different, but there'll be more on that shortly. This next element is really helpful for keeping time. I like to call it the gentle bounce. The key thing to grasp here is that the wrist will continue to bounce up and down regardless of whether it's making contact with the strings. So even though my strumming pattern is this, down, down, up, down, 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 up, down, up, you'll notice that my wrist is actually just going down, up, 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 and dipping into the strings when it needs to. This is absolutely crucial for your timing and your technique when it comes to strumming. You might also view this in 3 layers. So the top layer is your timeline, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The next layer is the motion of the hand, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Look at its relationship to the timeline, they're both exactly the same. And then at the bottom, you've got when you actually make contact with the strings, which of course is our classic strumming pattern, down, down, up, down, up. Look at how it relates to the timeline and where those specific strums fall. Earlier in the video I said that there's a difference between down strums and up strums. Let's have a look at that. The main difference is that down strums tend to strum all of the strings, and up strums only really tend to strum the highest 3 strings, the high E, the B and the G string. Check this out, see if you can see what my pick is hitting. I'll do it nice and slowly. Did you notice how on the up strums I was only hitting the highest 3 strings? Here's what it would look like if I was trying to hit all of the strings on the way up as well as the way down. Notice how there's all this extra movement from the hand. It's not really necessary. You just want to hit those highest strings on the way up. Now, I don't want you to think that just because we haven't mentioned the fretting hand yet that it's gotten away scot-free. You still have to consider the fretting hand when it comes to muting, especially with chords that use less than 6 strings. For example, when I'm playing a C major chord, I have to make sure that my fretting hand, third finger, is muting the low E with its tip. So the tip of the third finger of the fretting hand, whilst fingering a C major chord, is against the bottom of the low E string. That way, when I strum, when I'm strumming a bit more vigorously, my picking hand here doesn't have to be careful of the low E because it's muted. And this applies to other chords. So, for example, if we take an A chord, you'll very commonly see guitarists use their thumb to mute the low E string while they're strumming. Now, in classical circles, this might be seen as sacrilege, but in the contemporary world, guitarists do things with their thumb all the time. A couple of small examples: John Mayer, Ed Sheeran, when they do a D over F sharp chord like this. And the thumb does the bass note of the chord as well as muting the A string, just for example. Another example would be a D major chord. If you bring that thumb over, you can use it to cover the low E and the A, and that way when you're strumming, it doesn't give you any hassle because those two low strings are muted. I wasn't actually sure whether to include this next bit on the video, but I'm thinking it might be helpful. So we're going to compare what the arm looks like and what the wrist looks like, whether you're picking clean notes, whether you're palm muting notes, or whether you're actually playing chords. And that way, it may help reinforce the wrist position and the arm position that you're supposed to be in, because anytime you accidentally fall to the wrong one, you will hopefully be more aware of it. Let's say I'm picking the notes of a C major scale. Notice my wrist hasn't got an angle in it, okay? I'm just picking those notes. Now, the corner of my palm is sitting on the L shape between the bridge and the string here, this little L shape. It's where the corner of my palm sits as I'm picking those notes of the C major scale, okay? Now, another variation of picking is to palm mute, which means you use your palm and you move it slightly this way, which means the strings have become slightly duller. So notice there's millimeters between those two movements. But the point being is that neither of those are the angle that you need for strumming. So maybe when you're watching your favourite guitar players, maybe you'll start to notice the subtle differences in the way they do things when they're doing these slightly different techniques, and that should help you aid your strumming. Ultimately, learning to strum on the guitar is a combination of arm and wrist mechanics along with your own general sense of timing. There is certainly a feel element here that is kind of difficult to explain, and it's one of those things that once it clicks, you've got it and you're like, oh, I get this now. But really, as most things go on the guitar, or any instrument for that matter, it's just a matter of grinding, getting down to it, and practicing it every day until it starts to feel more natural. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want more, then please check out what's on your screen now.